Good morning, boys and girls. I'd like to read you a story this morning, and I hope that you can get to watch it before Thanksgiving. This book is called Balloons Over Broadway. This is one of my very favorite times of year. I love Thanksgiving, and I love the parade for Thanksgiving morning. This is a cool book about how that parade got started. When I taught third grade, we learned about the parade every year. This is the man we're going to learn about. This is him as a grown-up. His name is Tony Sarge. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarge loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. A marionette is a type of puppet. His father asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 every morning, every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night, he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast. Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. This is a pretty inventive 6-year-old. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. A marionette is a puppet. So out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionette's movements so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on the storybook characters that he knew and attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. Here he's working on a Humpty Dumpty puppet. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long they performed for shoppers jostling for a better look. I love store windows. Where I grew up, when I was very little, we would wander all along the streets in Los Angeles, and all the windows were decorated for Christmas. But Macy's had an even bigger job for Tony. So many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants, and as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions. Now, an immigrant is someone who moves here from another country, and their countries had traditions that they were sad they weren't able to do anymore. They had traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day in 1924. They were winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Thanksgiving is a very American tradition. Every year, the parade grew, but when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Macy asked Tony to replace the animals. Here's the boss, Mr. Macy, saying, "Tony, can you think of something spectacular?" Spectacular is a very big, juicy word, looking for something great instead of those live, scary animals. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down the streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how would Tony make his big puppets move? This is a blimp, and a company called Goodyear would make blimps. Where I grew up as a little kid in California, we saw blimps in the sky a lot. Big, floating, balloon-type aircraft. Then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. If you look closely in this picture, there are people walking along under the balloon with sticks that control the puppet. That's changed some today, but it's a pretty cool idea. But now the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Oh, I have this problem. I am not the tallest person in the world. Every time I go to a parade, someone taller stands in front of me, just like when I was a little kid. He says we've got to make this higher so everyone can see. Tony realized the puppets would have to be bigger and higher off the ground, and though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, to move and gesture, like the puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls are above the puppet, and the puppet hangs down. But what if the controls were below the puppet? The puppet could rise up. There's his idea. During the next year, Tony set his new ideas into motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. Most importantly, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled with not just air, but with helium too. You know about helium. Helium is a gas that's lighter than the air around us, which makes the air or the helium rise up with your balloon. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony did not know if everything would go as planned. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium? What if one of them hits a sharp object? I'll bet you've had a balloon pop before because it hit a sharp object. Will they fit under the L? The L is the nickname for an elevated train in New York, and they have to go under it with the parade. It was still dark on Thursday morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. Let's have a parade. Every Thanksgiving morning, the parade starts with those words to this day. Let's have a parade. That begins the parade. I gotta turn my book. Look. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up into the skies. Look, everybody can see now, even if you're short. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sallied down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York. We're used to thinking about canyons as being the space between two mountains. They're calling the space between tall buildings the canyons of New York. These kids can even watch the parade from their apartment building. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, remember that elevated train, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's famous parade. Every year, new characters are made into balloons, and everyone tries to guess what they'll be until that surprise at Thanksgiving time. Tony Sarge, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. Here is the original advertisement in the newspaper to tell people to come to a parade. Now, I hope that you can find some creative things at home that you could put together and make your own balloon. If you blew up a balloon and used markers or string or even paper towel rolls, you could make a very cool puppet like Tony Sarge did with his imagination. I would love it if you would do that and get a picture to me of your creation. This is my favorite parade all year. It happens early Thanksgiving morning, and guess who it always, always ends with? Santa Claus himself. I hope you get to enjoy the parade this year. Have a great Thanksgiving.